A cruel millionaire forced a waitress to play the violin at a luxury party to humiliate her. But when she started playing, everyone was... But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. Madison Taylor worked tirelessly at the Gilded Flame, a renowned restaurant in Manhattan, known for serving the city's wealthiest patrons. As a waitress, she often found herself juggling between the extravagant demands of the elite and her modest aspirations. Madison had long set aside her dream of becoming a professional violinist to support her family after her father's untimely passing. Her violin sat gathering dust in the corner of her tiny apartment, a bittersweet reminder of what could have been. One evening, Ethan Caldwell, a cold and sharp-tongued billionaire, arrived at the restaurant to host an exclusive event. Renowned for his wealth and infamous for his caustic personality, Ethan was hosting a party for some of the most influential figures in New York City. Madison, assigned to his table, worked diligently under the weight of his dismissive glances and biting remarks. "Do you do anything besides serve drinks?" Ethan sneered as Madison poured his wine. Caught off guard, she stammered a reply. I used to play the violin, sir." Ethan's interest was piqued, though not for the right reasons. He smirked, an idea forming in his mind. "Well, isn't that fascinating? We'll need some entertainment tonight. I'll give you a generous tip if you play something for us." Madison froze. She hadn't performed in years, and the thought of playing in front of an audience, especially one filled with condescending stares, terrified her. Yet, under the pressure of her manager's urging and the fear of losing her job, she reluctantly agreed. Ethan led Madison into the grand ballroom, where the most influential guests sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries. A polished grand piano gleamed in the corner, and beside it, an antique violin rested on a velvet stand, undoubtedly one of Ethan's impulsive acquisitions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan announced with a sardonic grin, "tonight's surprise performance comes courtesy of our lovely waitress, Miss Taylor. She will be gracing us with a piece on the violin." A murmur of amusement rippled through the crowd as Madison's cheeks flushed. She picked up the violin, her hands trembling. With one deep breath, she closed her eyes and placed the bow against the strings. As her fingers moved instinctively, the room fell silent. The haunting melody she played seemed to pull the very soul out of the violin, weaving an emotional tapestry that captivated every listener. Laughter ceased. Glasses were lowered, and a profound stillness blanketed the ballroom. By the time she finished, the last note hung in the air like a prayer, echoing in the stunned silence. Ethan stood frozen, his smirk replaced by an uncharacteristic expression of awe. Madison, her breath shallow and eyes still closed, had no idea how deeply she had touched the room, or the man who had sought to humiliate her. The silence in the grand ballroom lingered for a moment longer than Madison anticipated. She opened her eyes slowly, afraid to meet the gaze of the crowd. To her astonishment, every face was fixed on her with a mixture of awe and reverence. A ripple of applause broke the stillness, growing into an enthusiastic ovation that echoed through the grand room. Ethan Caldwell, seated at the head of the room, was as still as a marble statue. His sharp, cold features betrayed a flicker of something unrecognizable, confusion, perhaps even admiration. He had intended to make her the butt of his cruel joke, but instead, Madison had stolen the spotlight in a way no one expected. Madison felt her hands trembling as she set the violin down. She cast a glance toward Ethan, who remained uncharacteristically silent, his eyes locked on her. A nervous wave of panic washed over her. Was he angry that his plans had backfired? Before she could dwell further, an older man from the crowd approached her with an earnest expression. "That was extraordinary," the man said, taking her hand in his. "Where did you train?" I didn't, Madison stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean, I did when I was younger, but I've had to stop for a while now. Ethan finally rose from his seat, his towering presence commanding attention. Enough chatter, he said, his voice sharp, but lacking its usual venom. Miss Taylor, back to work. The crowd exchanged puzzled glances as Madison, red-faced and humiliated anew, hurried off the stage. She couldn't understand why Ethan dismissed her so curtly, especially after such a performance. It wasn't until later, while carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, that she overheard two guests whispering about how Ethan seemed shaken by her performance. He didn't even crack a joke about her, one guest remarked, sipping their champagne. Perhaps it reminded him of... The voice trailed off as the speaker caught Madison's curious glance and turned away quickly. Ethan, meanwhile, retreated to the balcony overlooking the city. The haunting melody Madison had played echoed in his mind, tugging at memories he had buried long ago. His late sister Clara had been a violin prodigy. Her music had once filled the very halls of this mansion until tragedy struck years ago. Ethan clenched the railing tightly, the emotions stirring within him unfamiliar and unwelcome. Downstairs, Claire, Ethan's sharp-eyed assistant, caught up with Madison. That was incredible, Claire said, her voice warm. You left everyone spellbound. Thank you, Madison replied shyly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, but I'm not sure Mr. Caldwell appreciated it. Claire glanced toward the balcony where Ethan brooded. He's not as unaffected as he seems. Trust me, you've touched something he hasn't felt in years, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. Madison, uncertain of how to respond, busied herself with clearing empty glasses. But Ethan's piercing gaze from across the room made her acutely aware that tonight had shifted something, both in her life and in his. Unbeknownst to her, this was only the beginning. Ethan's challenge would come sooner than expected, forcing her to decide whether she would continue hiding in the shadows or step boldly into the light. The following evening, Madison arrived at the Gilded Flame, expecting the night to pass quietly. But as soon as she stepped into the staff area, her manager intercepted her with an uncharacteristically nervous expression. "Madison," he began, his voice wavering, "Mr. Caldwell has requested you personally for another performance at his estate tonight." Madison blinked, confusion mingling with unease. "What? I mean, why would he want me to play again?" "He was very insistent," her manager replied. "He's offering double your night's wages if you agree." The proposition sent a jolt of unease through Madison. The memory of Ethan's mocking introduction from the previous night still stung, but the thought of additional income was hard to ignore. Reluctantly, she nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Hours later, Madison found herself once again entering the grandiose estate. The mansion was quieter this time, hosting only a small gathering of Ethan's closest associates. She was escorted to a lavish parlor where Ethan stood by the fireplace, his demeanor unreadable. "Miss Taylor," he greeted, his voice devoid of its usual edge. "Thank you for agreeing to perform again. Tonight's event is more intimate, just a few close associates and potential investors." Madison braced herself, unsure of his intentions. She spotted the same antique violin resting on its velvet stand and felt a pang of apprehension. "You'll play a single piece," Ethan continued, his tone matter of fact. "Something memorable. After that, you're free to go." The room filled with murmurs as the guests gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and expectation. Madison took a deep breath, picked up the violin, and positioned it beneath her chin. This time, however, her nerves didn't overwhelm her. She began to play. The notes flowed with precision and emotion, weaving a story of triumph and sorrow. Her music painted vivid scenes of struggle and hope, each crescendo lifting the spirits of her audience, each diminuendo pulling them into reflection. As she played, she glanced at Ethan. His face remained stoic, but his eyes betrayed an internal battle. For the first time, Madison wondered if there was something deeper beneath his icy exterior. When she finished, the room erupted into applause once more. Madison bowed, her confidence bolstered by the genuine appreciation radiating from the crowd. However, Ethan's reaction was muted. He simply nodded, dismissing her without a word. On her way out, Claire caught her arm. "You were amazing again," she whispered. Madison smiled faintly. "Thank you. But why does he keep asking me to play? What does he want from me?" Claire hesitated, her expression clouding. "Ethan doesn't do things without a reason, but for now, just keep playing. You might be changing more than you realize." Madison didn't know what to make of Claire's cryptic comment. As she walked out into the cool night air, she resolved to find out what game Ethan Caldwell was playing. Inside the mansion, Ethan stood alone. Gazing into the fireplace, Claire entered the room cautiously. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan," she said firmly. "She's not just some pawn in your schemes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She reminds me of Clara," he admitted after a long pause, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Her playing. It stirs things I've buried for years." Claire crossed her arms, her tone softening. "Then stop burying them, Ethan. If you don't handle this properly, you'll hurt her and yourself in ways you can't undo." Ethan didn't respond, but the flicker of conflict in his eyes spoke volumes. As the embers crackled in the fireplace, a quiet resolve began to take shape within him. Whether it was guilt, admiration, or something else entirely, Ethan knew one thing: Madison Taylor had awakened a part of him he wasn't sure he could confront. 2 weeks passed, and Madison's life had taken an unexpected turn. Ethan Caldwell's mysterious invitations became a recurring event, each time pulling her deeper into his world. Her performances had garnered attention, leading to whispers in high society about the enigmatic waitress with a violin. Offers began trickling in, from small recitals to a feature at a local music festival. It was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. But Ethan remained an enigma. His demeanor shifted unpredictably, one moment cold and detached, the next oddly attentive. Madison couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of some unspoken plan. Each time they interacted, she felt the weight of his gaze, as if he were searching for something in her that even he couldn't articulate. One evening, after another successful performance, Madison was surprised when Ethan approached her. Instead of his usual curt acknowledgement, he extended an invitation. "There's a charity gala next week," he said, his tone unusually measured. "It's one of the biggest events of the year. I'd like you to perform." Madison hesitated, her wariness evident. "Why me? Surely you could hire someone more established?" Ethan's eyes darkened, but he quickly masked the emotion. "Because you're better than anyone else, and this is an opportunity to showcase your talent." The sincerity in his words disarmed her, and she reluctantly agreed. The night of the gala arrived, and Madison stood in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel, her violin in hand. The room was a spectacle of opulence. Chandeliers glittering above, tables adorned with crystal and gold, and a sea of impeccably dressed elites mingling. At the center of it all was Ethan, exuding his usual air of control and authority. As Madison prepared to take the stage, Claire appeared at her side. "Be careful tonight," she whispered, her voice low. Madison frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire glanced toward Ethan, her expression conflicted. "He's under more pressure than you know. There's a lot riding on this event. For him and for you." Before Madison could press further, the MC announced her name. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the spotlight. The moment her bow touched the strings, the room transformed. Madison poured her soul into the performance, weaving together the echoes of her struggles and triumphs. Her music spoke to every corner of the room, leaving no one untouched. Even Ethan, seated at the head table, appeared entranced. But as the final note lingered in the air, an unexpected voice shattered the silence. "That's her, isn't it?" A sharply dressed man near Ethan spoke loudly, pointing toward Madison. "The girl you've been parading around to cover your losses." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the man continued. "You're using her as a distraction while your investments crumble. Is this your grand plan, Ethan? Parading a waitress to mask your failures?" Madison froze, her heart pounding. The accusations hung heavy in the air, and all eyes turned toward Ethan. He rose slowly, his expression thunderous. "You don't know what you're talking about," Ethan growled, his voice cutting through the tension. "Oh, but I do," the man shot back. "This is nothing more than a desperate attempt to salvage your reputation." Tears stung Madison's eyes as the realization hit her. Had she been nothing more than a pawn in Ethan's game? Humiliated, she set the violin down and fled the stage, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd. Ethan hesitated for a moment before following her. He found her on the terrace, gripping the railing as tears streamed down her face. "Madison," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Was it true?" she demanded, spinning around to face him. "Was I just a part of your scheme to save face?" Ethan looked away, guilt flashing across his features. "It started that way," he admitted quietly, "but it's not that anymore." Madison shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't get to decide that. I trusted you, Ethan. I thought you believed in me." "I do," he insisted, stepping closer, "more than you realize. Your music, it's changed me. You've changed me." But Madison wasn't ready to hear his confession. "Stay away from me," she whispered before walking away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the cold night air, confronted by the weight of his actions and the woman he had hurt. Days turned into weeks, and Madison kept her distance from Ethan Caldwell and his gilded world. She returned to her routine at the Gilded Flame, though her heart wasn't in it. The invitations to perform had dwindled, as had her confidence. She couldn't stop replaying Ethan's admission in her mind, how his schemes had used her, how her trust had been betrayed. But the night of the gala had left more than pain in its wake. Unbeknownst to Madison, a clip of her performance had gone viral, shared by an impressed guest. The haunting melody of her violin captivated viewers around the world. Offers began to pour in, concerts, collaborations, even a recording deal. At first, Madison hesitated, but Claire's unexpected visit changed her mind. "I know you don't want to hear this, but Ethan regrets everything," Claire said, as she handed Madison a thick envelope. "He's a stubborn man, but he's trying to make things right. He asked me to deliver this." Madison opened the envelope, revealing a letter and a significant check. The letter, written in Ethan's precise hand, was brief. "Madison, your music deserves the world. I may not have started with the right intentions, but I see your brilliance now. This is not charity. It's a small step toward redemption. Please don't let my mistakes hold you back. Ethan." The check was made out to her in an amount that could cover years of tuition at any music conservatory she chose. Madison's fingers tightened around the paper, her emotions a tumultuous mix of anger, gratitude, and disbelief. 2 months later, Madison stood backstage at a packed auditorium. The crowd's energy buzzed through the air as she adjusted the bow of her violin. This was her moment, her debut as a solo artist. Her journey here had been far from easy, but she had reclaimed her dream on her own terms. The lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Madison Taylor." Applause thundered as she stepped onto the stage. Her eyes scanned the audience, pausing when they landed on a familiar face. Ethan sat in the back row, dressed modestly, his usual arrogance replaced by quiet humility. Their gazes met briefly before Madison looked away, focusing on her performance. Her music flowed with unparalleled emotion, a culmination of her struggles, triumphs, and growth. Each note resonated with the audience, weaving a tapestry of resilience and hope. By the time the final chord hung in the air, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation. Backstage, Ethan approached her cautiously. "You were magnificent," he said softly. Madison studied him for a moment, searching for any trace of the man who had once used her as a pawn. But what she saw was different, genuine admiration and regret. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. Ethan hesitated before handing her a sealed envelope. "This is the last time I'll bother you," he said. "It's an official offer to sponsor your next tour, no strings attached." Madison took the envelope but didn't open it. "I appreciate the gesture, Ethan, but I don't need you to fix things for me anymore." He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I understand." As he turned to leave, Madison called after him, "Ethan!" He stopped, his back to her. "I don't hate you," she said quietly, "but forgiveness takes time." Ethan turned, his expression unreadable, and gave her a small nod before walking away. In the years that followed, Madison's career soared. She became a celebrated violinist, her performances filling concert halls around the globe. Ethan, meanwhile, transformed his life, using his wealth and influence to support young artists and underprivileged musicians. Though their paths rarely crossed, each carried the imprint of the other. Madison's music now infused with unshakable confidence, and Ethan's actions guided by a newfound sense of purpose. And every now and then, when Madison played her violin under the glow of the stage lights, she thought of the man who had once sought to humiliate her, only to become the catalyst for her greatest triumph.